Bianca is known for her deeply immersive and thought-provoking work, blending investigative reporting with personal experience to explore fascinating subcultures, industries, and human obsessions. She is the New York Times bestselling author, Court Dork, an earlier book about the world of elite sommeliers. Her latest book, Get the Picture, dives into the art world, pulling back the curtain on the institutions and personalities that influence what we see and value. So please join me in welcoming Bianca Bosker in conversation with our own artist, journalist, and former president, Betsy Ashton.
I'm one of those people who, when I was old enough to hold a pencil, I sketched the teacher when I got bored in class. And she said, "Betsy, what are you doing? Bring that up here." And so I'd march up, and she said, "Oh, may I keep that?" At which point I thought I had a future in art. Fast forward a few years, and I'm out for a Master's of Fine Arts in painting, and all of a sudden, someone who likes to tell stories in a figurative way is told, "Oh, figurative art is dead. You can't do that." I mean, the only thing that was valuable in those days was Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, throw balloons of paint at the wall, and it helped if you were a man. And what really got me was the summer that I had to paint stripes. The whole summer with Gene Davis, Washington color painters. I happened to be in Washington, which is not exactly known for its great art. But at any rate, I quit. And as you probably know, I did wind up getting into journalism. That's another story, but I'll spare that for another day. But decades later, I went back to the art. And decades later, it seems to be okay to do figurative work, because I've done the portraits of immigrants that are all over the place now. And if you wanted to ask me, what is art? Is it this? Is it that? Is it the figure back there? I mean, boy, it's a big question. And most of us are too scared to ask, right? You know, oh, you don't want to look that unsophisticated. Bianca had the brains and the guts to go after the big questions. And what's charming about this book, I loved it, couldn't put it down. What's charming about it is she immersed herself in the art world, didn't just interview a few people, lived it as working in a gallery, and then working as an assistant in an artist studio, and then working as a guard at the Guggenheim, and got all different points of view from all kinds of people about what is art, what makes it art, what is good art. So how did you get into this? What started you on this incredible journey?
Well, thank you for the kind words, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for braving this absolute Arctic tundra to be here this afternoon. It is very exciting to be in a group of journalists and reporters and authors and writers and artists, if not a little bit intimidating. So I look forward to all of you, fact-checking and asking some intense questions during the Q&A. I would expect nothing less. And yes, so to talk about myself now, for me, this grew out of a real ignorance. I mean, art was a passion of mine growing up, but I have to confess that for most of my adult life, art and I were not on speaking terms. I would go to galleries and museums, and maybe some of you have had this experience too, feel like I was at least 2 tattoos and a master's degree away from figuring out what the heck was going on. And I'd walk into these really, impeccably lit white rooms with their, hushed chambers and intense lights, and turn a corner to find a bunch of people quietly contemplating a sculpture of decaying vegetables on a stained mattress. And I really felt like everyone got the punchline except me. I felt like I didn't know what was going on. I didn't belong. And for a very long time, I will admit, I took the coward's way out and I withdrew. And I can't imagine that that much would have changed in my relationship with art, except a few years back, I was back home in Oregon helping my mom purge her basement. And I happened to discover these paintings by my late grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor, inspired by her time as a displaced person in a camp after the war. And she had these paintings of these dancing carrots, because when she was in this camp, she was helping to, she helped the children stage an art performance where they dressed up as carrots. It was the only thing she could think of that was politically innocuous. You know, red apples might suggest sympathy with communism. I mean, the whole thing was very fraught. But she painted later on these dancing carrots. And I couldn't stop thinking about them. They really haunted me. They chased me back to New York City, and they kept turning my mind round and round this question of why she had treated art as essential, this thing that she turned to when life turned itself inside out. She was not an artist. She was a trained economist. She didn't have kids at the time. And I began to be really worried about what I was missing by turning my back on art. And so I thought I was try again. So I started going back to galleries and museums, and I have to be honest, a lot of the art was, to me, not recognizable as art, but the people fascinated me. I consider myself someone obsessed with obsession, and these artists, these art lovers, I mean, I had never met a group of people willing to spend so much, time and effort on something that to me was of so little practical value. And that intrigued me, and I was really kind of fascinated by their passion. At the same time, they made me feel like I was really missing out on something big. These are people who, artists who treat, 100-year-old paintings like they're as necessary as vital organs, gallerists who max out credit cards to show these twisted hunks of metal they swear can change the world. And I was intrigued that scientists are right there in telling us that art is essential to our existence, as one biologist puts it, as necessary to us as food or sex. And these artists told me that they pitied me. They said that I lacked visual literacy, which they said was downright dangerous in a world so saturated with images. And to be fair, they had this expansive approach to life that bore nothing in comparison with my own hyper-optimized existence. It was a sort of, maybe some of you can relate, but probably you are too, mature to do this, but I would be the kind of person who would text from the toilet while listening to a podcast on 2 times speed, sick puppy. And these artists acted like they had accessed these trap doors in their brains, and I became consumed with this question of whether I could see art, whether I could see the world the way they did, and what might change as a result. And so, to your point, I decided to throw myself in. I decided I wanted to not just sort of do these interviews, but really get in there and work in the art world, which no one except me thought was a good idea.
But it proved to be an interesting journey. Now, you start the book with the whole question of the heads. Who's in charge? And are they really in charge? Tell us a little bit about who are the heads. And there's some interesting things that one of the warnings you heard going into this was things that pass for ethical in the art world would be criminal anywhere else. Huh?
Yeah.
Want to share a little bit about that?
Again, we've got a lot of reporters here. So, yes, I will say that, I perhaps naively expected the art world to be full of these open-minded iconoclasts who would just want to embrace as many people as possible in the warm hug of art. And that was not what I found. When I started poking around, people refused to talk to me. I mean, I had, threats, insults. I mean, people told me that my whole idea of trying to get into the art world, work in it, and then write about what I learned was impossible, maybe even dangerous. There was a collector that basically told me that if I wanted if I went ahead with this, it was a very bad idea if I wanted to keep living in New York City. He was like, essentially intimate, like, he was like, you may have to join the witness protection program afterwards. Another gallerist who I spoke with who suggested that if I wrote anything he disagreed with, he would trash my my personal, professional, psychological reputation. And that did surprise me. I mean, I was sort of taken aback. You know, we were talking about this over lunch, like I've done reporting in China, which is a difficult place to be a foreign journalist. It's talking to one can get you arrested. And yet nothing prepared me for how secretive the art world would be. I really felt like I had an easier time getting answers in Chengdu than in Chelsea. And to your point about the heads is this term that I heard used by a very influential gallerist to describe essentially the art fiends who live for it and also play this outsized role in determining what makes it to the canon of art history. And I became very interested in this question. You know, I did want to get inside and really be part of it because I wanted to see, first of all, what was it that they didn't want me to see? I mean, as you all know, nothing gets a journalist's interest like intimating that something is deeply rotten and then refusing to talk about it. So the more people kind of warned me to stay away, of course, the more determined I became to get inside and see what I could find out. But I think also, these, I really wanted to see, how does an artwork go from this germ of an idea in an artist's studio to a place like the Met, because I felt like all the decisions that affect the artwork are also decisions that ultimately affect us. Our idea of what art is, why it matters, who makes it. And for me, these guiding questions were really, why does art matter and how can any of us, myself included, engage with it more deeply? And so the heads were, they were a difficult bunch to crack. And my first job was with this very cool up-and-coming gallery in Brooklyn, where I was allowed in, but I very quickly became initiated into really what I would describe as the strategic snobbery that exists to keep people out. My boss told me that, there were a number of things wrong with me. As he pulled me aside to tell me one afternoon, he was like, you're not the coolest cat in the art world, so having you around, it's just like lowering my coolness. He suggested a makeover, severe haircut, no jewelry. He suggested I tone down my overly enthusiastic personality. If you spent time in the art world, you may have noticed that the true art professional almost exclusively discusses art in an affectless monotone that makes them sound like they're running out of batteries. My whole language had to change. As a writer, I think we are all very sensitive to language, and this was no different. I was suggested that I excise certain words from my vocabulary, so work is not sold, it's placed. It is not finger painting, it is indexical marks of the artist's body. And this whole art speak really exists not as, that's not a hypothetical example that is taken from an actual review, but this whole art speak exists not to communicate clearly, but really to establish you as someone who does or does not get it. Really these days to sound like you know something about art, the trick is to sound like a French professor who's been the victim of a terrible translation job. And that's arguably where art speak got its start. But just as a case in point, there was a fascinating analysis of hundreds, if not more, art world press releases that found that the words spatial and non-spatial get used interchangeably. So again, this is not about communicating clearly. It's about, kind of distinguishing a sort of in-group that has bought into what's going on here. And I think, to me, this was frustrating on a number of different levels, but it was also reassuring because it made me feel like I wasn't nuts. Like, no wonder I had felt so alienated by the art world. It was evidently doing its very best to keep people out. And this extended not only to journalists, but also to human beings, the general public, or in art speak, as one gallerist referred to them, Joe Schmoes. Joe Schmo would be the art world for the general public. Hiding galleries on second floors, withholding prices, refusing to sell you things even if they're for sale. You may think you're judging the artwork, but the gallerists are judging you even more. And it
They didn't want Joe Schmo in.
no, yeah. I mean, it was fascinating to me, you know, just if you think about the architecture of galleries, this isn't every gallery, and this also isn't only New York, but a lot of galleries are located not on ground floor spaces. And you might think, okay, well, rent in New York is very expensive. It's that, but it's not only that. You know, one gallerist described a ground floor storefront as being actively undesirable because then you get, and I quote, random ass people walking in. This is, of course, synonymous with the public, right? And so, you know, there is this sense of, you know, sort of, I mean, even the word, I mean, gallery is ultimately art speak for art store, right? I mean, that's what it is. So I think that this is not everyone in the art world, but I think for me, as a sort of entry point, being able to understand this hidden logic, and it is a very deliberately hidden logic, was empowering. It also made it less off-putting to sort of understand what are the theatrics that are going into this and why. And ultimately, I think that what bothers me about them is the way that I think it alienates the rest of us from our own relationship with art, and it undermines our faith in our own eye, in our own visual literacy and relationship with the work.
They're sort of saying, we don't want you in here if you can't afford it, or if you can't appreciate it.
Unfortunately, I mean, not unfortunately, but like, it's not even, you can have the money. That itself is not, that is a necessary but insufficient criteria.
There's a wonderful quote from Jack, who you were with, the Brooklyn gallerist, getting the eye, which you were trying to get the eye so that you actually really knew what was good about the art. And the artists were saying, contemporary art was not about beauty. Well, for a long time, we've thought it was about beauty. For generations and generations. No, they raved about being disturbed by art and endorsed feeling uncomfortable, lost, or confused, as though these were terrific lifestyle choices, way better for you than, say, yoga. I thought that was a pretty good line you said. And then, to Jack, the value of art wasn't making your dining room look pretty. Art was where culture touched down first. You'd see it in a painting before it showed up in a music video. And art could be moral homework. This is giving voice to a marginalized community. That was art for him. Did you come to feel that? Is that where you became?
Well, look, I think, as I said, like for me, the kind of two motivating questions. And when I was throwing myself into this world, I really believe in being guided by the questions. I think it is kind of intellectually dishonest to know your answer before you've done the research, before you've, you know, it's hard, like, it's nonfiction. I didn't know where this was going to end up. But I was guided by these questions, like I said, why does art matter? Like, why is this thing that is, you know, one of our oldest inventions? We invented, you know, paint before the wheel. It is one of our most universal urges. We've all engaged with art, whether we're Parisians or preschoolers or Paleolithic, you know, cave dwellers. You know, it's one of our earliest means of expressing ourselves. We were painting long before we could, you know, write. So why art? And also, again, how can any of us engage with it more deeply? Like, how can any of us build our eye? And I will say that there's many different answers to those questions, and I try to, you know, highlight those in the book. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that, you know, I kind of, for me, found that there were elements that resonated more than others. And so I will say that I think what was really informative about my first gallery experience was it illuminated to me, I guess I should say, I was really taken aback initially by how little time art connoisseurs and gatekeepers seem to spend looking at the work itself. And you know, instead they ask questions like, where did the artist go to school? You know, who owns the work? Who are their friends? Who are they sleeping with? And all of that was the context around the work, you know, the web of names around the artist, the sort of social cachet. And that seemed to really play an outsized role in determining people's opinion of the value of the work. As one gallerist put it to me, he was like, you know, basically the key criteria that he will look at when deciding whether to show an artist is this someone I want to hang out with? And
This is like joining the club. What's it have to do with the art?
Right. I mean, it's just, I think that there was, as someone had put it to me, he was like, without the context, you can't understand what the fuck you're looking at, was what he said. And again, I mean, this was, I think part of it was I was, I think, taken aback. I had come, as Eileen said, from spending time in the wine world, and as part of being training to become a somm, you do a lot of blind tasting, where you're given a glass of wine, and you have to, just by smelling it and tasting, you have to figure out what grape was it made with, where is it from, what do you think of it, and it's all about staying true to your own felt experience. And I felt like here the art world was telling me, like, forget your own felt experience. Like, what you need to know is what's written on the resume. Like, that's what's going to tell you whether or not this is a worthwhile artist, whether it's worth your time, whether it's valuable, all of that. And this frustrated me. I felt like, for one thing, it was another way of keeping out the Joe Schmoes, keeping out the rest of us, because these gatekeepers become so much more important if we're told that we need years of going to art fairs, familiarity with artists' bios, the right pair of jeans, to commune with a painting. And also, I felt like I was being encouraged to outsource my eye to the hive mind. And so I became frustrated, I guess, with what I saw as sort of the undue weight put on context. And so that sent me to try and really be able to see artworks more face-to-face, which is how I ended up working with an artist in her studio as her assistant, because I wanted to see, really I wanted to go back to the basics. I wanted to understand, why does someone pick this green over that one? Where does a painting come from? I wanted to sort of like brush away the cloud of context and those names and really see the art face to face. And I think for me, that was something that unlocked in me what I came to see as, I guess, for me, the rewarding way to look at an artwork. And I think for me, it was something clicked really when I was there in Julie, the artist I work with, in her studio, where I felt like I began to appreciate how to look at art like an artist. And to me, that meant slowing down. It meant paying attention to the physical form of the work, which is not a popular idea in the art world, really. And it meant paying attention to the artist's decisions. When you see an artist working, I think that when we're in these rooms and we're in galleries, to me, it's like the Immaculate Conception. It's like these paintings just appeared, right? I mean, look at this beautiful room that we're looking at these incredible works. And I think that what we don't see is really the way that making an artwork is athletic. I mean, it really is. It's like, I lost patches of arm hair to a sculpture. I got like blistered stretching canvases. I watched, Julie breaking a sweat trying to mix the exact right color gray, starting paintings over, discarding them. And, as she put it, painting is constant decision making. And so I think that when I then come to work, I do try to not focus on the context. I do try and just be with the work to sort of, like look at a piece like this one, right? Where it's sort of like they made a decision to fold this work on the diagonal, not exactly on the side. I mean, Mel was saying, I think, that he doesn't like artwork that you have to read a description to understand. And I sympathize with that, but I was also telling him that sometimes when you struggle with those pieces, sometimes it means that the work is not working, that the art is not working, like the artist hasn't succeeded, in the same way that not every writer writes a good piece every time. Sometimes it means the art is not working, but sometimes it means that the viewer isn't working. And I think that's where spending the time comes in. And I think context, is such a tempting crutch to rely on because that's how our brains work. We do not look at the world like video cameras. We are not accurately, objectively recording the scenes around us. Our brains are really these trash compactors, and they're constantly compressing the information coming in. We have these filters of expectation that preemptively dismiss, prioritize, sort all the raw data coming in before we get the full picture. And artists and scientists, and this really resonated with me, have come to a similar explanation from different paths of why art is so crucial, which is that it helps us yank off those filters of expectation. They help our minds jump the curb. Artworks are not always pleasant, they are not always beautiful, but they oftentimes, almost like dreams, give us these unusual, peculiar, puzzling images that our brains actually love. They help sort of disrupt these algorithms that we use to compress the world. And so I think, in a way, what art does when you spend that time, when you just be in the work, when you look at it, when you stay in the work, it helps our minds jump the curve. It introduces this glitch. It's a glitch that is a gift. It's a glitch that, helps us ultimately experience and see so much more when it comes to the artwork, when it comes to the world around us. So this is a long answer. I have a lot of feelings about this subject, obviously, but I guess for me, I do think that I came out ultimately really believing in the value for each of us in building our own eye and developing our own eye. And I don't think that that is something that the gatekeepers of the art world always necessarily encourage. And that's to our detriment, and it's also, I think, to the detriment of artists.
You actually also, you mentioned here now that you were in the studio working with Julie, and that was great fun. And you went to a conference of scientists talking about art, which is where this gift of art and removing the subjective and bringing in, what you see and taking it in more was very good. But then you went to the gallery and you worked as a guard and you watched Joe Schmoes come in and look at the art. What did you glean from that that really, really hit you?
Yeah. It was, so there are a number of different reasons that I worked as a guard, but one of them was that I was interested, and I wanted it to be like a kind of warm welcome to the general public, who maybe hadn't had one, to the art world. And I was curious, to sort of see how people engage with art. I also wanted to know, how would being around art for hours on end with no opportunity for escape affect my own relationship with art? If you think about it, guards spend more time around art than anybody. When it comes to the museums in the city, they are, generally speaking, the longest tenured employees at these institutions. I remember talking with guards at the Whitney who had taught the curators things about the work because they're just around it. Not only for hours at a time, but years, decades. I worked with a colleague at the Guggenheim who'd been there since the invention of disco. He knows the collection. And I think that, what struck me was, it seems very obvious to say that the more time we spend with an artwork, the deeper and the better we will appreciate it. And yet, why don't more of us do it? There's studies that show that the average amount of time someone spends looking at an artwork is a matter of seconds. And that's if they've even bothered to stop. We spend, considerably longer reading the wall text, or actually, as these are called, I love this, they're called tombstones, the things that have the artist's name, the material, the date. Sometimes you have the actual wall text that has an explanation from the curator or the art historian about the work. We spend much longer looking at the text than we do looking at the work itself. And working as a guard, I would tell you that initially it was really boring. And so I would do little things to break up the monotony, like counting how many seconds someone spent at an artwork or whether they bothered to stop. And a lot of them we do pass by. And I began to, as one of these exercises, one day I was counting all the security cameras, and another day, inspired by this idea of slow looking, I challenged myself to, on each 40-minute shift that I spent before I rotated to a different gallery, to pick one work of art and just look at that one work for the full 40 minutes. And there was an artist who I'd done a studio visit with who gave me the really simple but I think helpful advice to when looking at an artwork. She said, just try and notice 5 things about it. And these doesn't have to be grandiose. It does not have to be, this is a commentary on capitalism in the post-war age. It could simply be she chose, or this artist, I don't know if it's a man or woman, chose cream off-white paper, not white. Right? That was a decision. That's something I noticed about it. It could be something you notice about it could just be about how it makes you feel. Maybe if you're Mel, you're this is really annoying, right? You're frustrated. And there was, one of the things I did this with, I'm singling you out, I know, was this sculpture of a big sweep of white marble, sort of looked like toothpaste as you're squeezing it onto the brush, and so smooth, so round. And, I mean, after that 40 minutes, I mean, I noticed 5 things, 5 more, 5 more. And I developed this relationship with this work in a way. I mean, I began to experience what I can only describe as love for a hunk of marble. It was this feeling that I could be around it for as long as I could see in the future and not get tired of its company. And with that slow looking, I really began to develop other relationships with the artwork. It's not all of them positive. There were some real smug jerks in this abstract expressionist show. There was a Bacon, where some days, a Francis Bacon work, where some days I was like, I mean, it was torrid. It was so torrid. Like some days I would just take time out of my lunch break to spend time with it, and other days like I couldn't stand to look at these deformed, gruesome bodies. And I think with that experience and looking at how people engage with work, so looking at that sweep of marble, there was the tombstone next to the work. I began to stand in front of it because I was a real asshole, but I realized that the label was cutting off people's experience of the work. And they would look at the piece, they would look at the label, and they would say, I'm not going to tell you the name of it yet, but when they would look at it and say, oh yeah, got it, and then move on. But when they just challenged themselves just to look deeper, I mean, the things they saw, it was incredible. I mean, they would see, a woman giving birth, a foot, a character from a Japanese film, it went on and on and on. And the name of the piece is Miracle Seal 1. And it does look like a seal. But when they would look at the wall text, they would just say, oh, yeah, it's a seal. Like, I see that. And then move on. And so I do think that what that taught me about how people would look at art is I think that we're all busy, but that pushed, I think any of us can have a really deep and unmediated experience. But I think the second thing is also that I think I used to do this too. I mean, I would treat going to a museum like the only way I could get my money's worth was to see every single thing in the place. And I began to feel like that is like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet and wondering why you feel sick after having like mimosa, sushi, cheese fries, and a waffle. Like, you don't have to see everything. You don't have to like everything. Treat it as an a la carte experience. Like, I think, look at this building, which is so full of art. If there's one piece that you can spend 5 minutes, 15 minutes with, you've done it. You've done it. You've had the experience. And so I guess that's just, and I would encourage you, I do it too. I do read the wall labels, but like, try not to.
You use the word experience, which there are 2 things I want to get on before we turn it over to everybody else. And one is something that blew my mind, because maybe I'm just getting old, but there was this artistic experience. You found a young woman who has a lovely butt and shows it off all over Instagram as a butt influencer. And what she does when she has a exhibit is she takes her butt, with or without anything on it, and sits on people's faces. Come on, is that art or is that good old-fashioned hard porn?
That's a good question. Yes, so I was invited to a show by this artist who goes by the name Mandy Allfire. And an artist invited me to her show. She was having an opening, and all I knew about her was what was in the press release. And according to the press release, she had, I'm going to give you her context, a MFA from Columbia, which is, very good art school, a track record at showing at some of the most impressive arts venues in the country. And more recently, she had been performing, as you say, as an ass influencer on Instagram. And I hope this is not going to be the last time that I'm allowed back in the building, but just to explain to all of you, because I wouldn't expect you to be familiar with such things. An ass influencer is someone who has amassed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers on social media by posting pictures of their butt. Mandy at the time had like 300,000-ish followers. And for her opening, she had invited her fans to come to the gallery for a live face sitting in which she was going to sit on their faces until, and I quote from the press release, they couldn't take it anymore. And I read this, and I was like, this is the sign. Someone just said disgusting. This is the sign of the decline and fall of Western civilization. And I wanted to believe at this point that I was into whatever like avant-garde tomfoolery the kids were up to these days, but this felt like it was too far. It also was it was a case where a real live artist was inviting me to go with her to an opening, and I felt like I couldn't say no because maybe next time it would be something good, and this was, I was trying to put myself all in. So I went, and I got there. The art was already happening. There was, a man naked, sort of slick as a manatee, naked except for leopard briefs, and there she was, sitting on his face. She was in a black lace lingerie, and sort of gently, sort of bouncing like a discerning mattress shopper, testing the merchandise. And long story short, she turns to the audience and she was like, "Who's going to go next?" And that's when I felt myself raise my hand. And so. Anyway, don't ask me. My mind is a blank. But, anyway, long story short, she ends up sitting on my face, and I couldn't stop thinking about this experience. And I think that for me, there were a number of reasons, but one of them was it did raise this question for me of what is art? Was this art? It made me realize that this was a very basic question that I still couldn't answer. And it sent me, I read so much art criticism so that you don't have to. I took stacks of books out to the library, and I went hunting through the history, the philosophy, and, I was very intrigued to learn that what we think of as art these days is really the byproduct of these rather arbitrary decisions made by status-conscious Europeans in the 1760s who decided that there was a handful of human activities that qualified as art, painting, sculpture, poetry, architecture on a good day, and the rest of it was mere craft. Art could lift your soul, but craft kept you dry, it kept your feet warm. And yet, for thousands of years before this, art had been considered anything involving human ingenuity and skill. So training horses, passing laws, blowing glass, carving marble. And there is this argument that art is universal, right? And that it is this impulse that has been with us, not only, not something that we invented once we kind of needed something to do once humans figured out how to live past age 20, but something that has been absolutely essential to our survival as a species. So long story short, what is art is a very big question. I do think that I came to a place of having a more expansive definition of art, of sort of opening it up. I think that it can be very personal at times, right? Where art is almost this handshake between the creator and the viewer. And artists have, I think, an uncanny ability to look at the everyday with an art eye. They can take inspiration from a parked motorcycle. They can, see the beauty and the sculptural quality of a sewage treatment plant. And I do think when it comes to Mandy's work, I've talked about it with a lot of people. I struggled with writing about it because I was like, it's strange, it's weird, it's out there. And at the same time, it has stuck with me. It has made me ask questions. It has sparked conversations more than a lot of the easily definable art that I have seen. And I commend it for that, absolutely. I think it's difficult. I think it's unusual. And I think that's also exciting.
Moving right along to one last question from me, because it must be getting close to a quarter of. Okay. We have to talk a little bit about the art market. And there was something in the book that stunned me about the artist Julie, who was Julie Curtis, who was doing very well. All of a sudden, her photographs, paintings, right, were selling very well. And then, all of a sudden, they were being auctioned off by the collectors that had bought them for a couple $100,000 more than, of course, they'd paid the artist. Artists do a lot better when they're dead, as you know. And this was viewed as a very bad thing, that she was kind of peaking too soon and losing it. What is going on?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. I started working with Julie Curtis, who's amazing. She changed not only the way I look at art, but the way I look at the world, full stop. And I started working with her this very interesting time where she was going from a sort of emerging up-and-coming artist, and I should say my focus was really on the more emerging up-and-coming side, because I think that is the highest stakes and least covered part of the art world. We hear a lot about the big monies, the big galleries, the big names. That is not most people's experience of the art world. As she had just been going from emerging and someone who had to have a day job to support her art on the side, like a lot of artists, to someone who could work on her art full time because it was selling through her gallery on what's called the primary market. And then yes, just kind of the moment where I was joining her, it was starting to be resold at auction on the secondary market for, let's say there was a piece that she had earned like about $600 off of that was being sold for six figures, of which she saw $0. And you might think, okay, well that's great. I mean, she can, charge so much more for the work than she thought, like she'll be rich. But in the world of context, high prices can be seen as in bad taste, or they can be seen as sort of too commercial. They can taint an artist. There can be a sense that, yes, she's peaking too soon. There is a herd mentality very much in the art world, as one gallerist put it, collectors are sheep. And I think that it was very instructive in the weight that context has over an artist. I mean, the paintings hadn't changed. It was just the price, and it was a price. She had no control over what people were doing with her work. And I do think when it comes to the art market, we were talking about this over drinks. Someone had asked about money laundering, and I think that what's even, more interesting than sort of illegal behavior that happens in the art world is the legal behavior that is, when you really look at it, off-putting, to say the least. Insider trading is illegal, but it is like the rule of law in the art world, essentially. It's highly encouraged. There was, when I was working for one gallery during an art fair, I recall having a group, it was like a curator who was taking a group of donors around the different booths and sort of pointing out like these were the favorite works of the fair, and they came by our booth, and then later one of the museum patrons came back to say that she would buy 2 copies of the exact same photograph, one to be shipped to the museum and one to be shipped directly to her house. And this is a kind of insider trading in the sense that once a piece goes to a museum collection, it tends to be worth more money because the context is that much better. And so, I think it was just that this happens all the time, right? Where collectors sort of encourage, if you can afford it, becoming members of a board of trustees of a museum, because essentially you get tips on who is up and coming at the museum, who are the curators looking at. And so there is a way in which I think, it is philanthropy. What we call philanthropy is by another name, I think, sort of polite corruption. And I think that it happens a lot. Again, it's sort of, I don't want to say encouraged, but, there's, and then don't get me started on all the ways to evade sales tax. These aren't things that not unfortunately, but these are not things that I've done, but like, there's a lot of shifting around of art in low tax states, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As one dealer put it, he was like, I've never paid a dime in sales tax, so, yeah.
We took a break from politics this month.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'm sure some of you have some questions out there for Bianca.
Questions, where are they? There's a couple of hands over there, a couple of hands over here.
Hi, I'm Fran Carpentier, a member of the Silurians. I just have to know what happened to your grandmother's carrot painting. I hope you have it, or I'll take it.
No, I do have it, and I was... and some other works of hers as well. Like she did some amazing life drawing paintings, but she was an incredible woman in so many different ways. And I regret not having had conversations with her about really why art became this huge part of her life. But it did. I think she always spoke about it with such conviction that it left no room for doubt. It wasn't even a question for her. But yeah, she had a lot of talent and skill, and I treasure them.
Hi, Susan Lipinski, member. My question is, have you ever seen a movie that you thought did justice to the artist and his or her work?
That's a good question. What comes to mind as you describe that is more, I guess, the opposite, right? Where seeing art are like movies where it's always like, these like big dramatic things. And again, it kind of plays on this idea that like art is, and for some artists it does happen. I think there's some artists who like, the work that goes into the art piece can happen sort of before they come to the canvas. So it does become a sort of quick process. But I think movies are not, I think that they oversimplify it, and it is more dramatic to have this sudden burst of almost like orgiastic creativity, whereas I think being with artists in the studio, it's a lot more like, like building a building, it's messy, and again, it's heavy, and it just takes a while. But it doesn't always look that way, right? And we don't always think about that as the viewer. So there's not one that's instantly coming to mind. I think that what I will say is one of my favorite books about the art world is actually a graphic novel by an artist, and it's the Wendy series, and it's funny, and it's weird, and it's like a great kind of, it's satirical, but it's also deeply accurate. And I remember reading it before my book came out, and I was like, fuck, he nailed it. You know what I mean? Like, I want to do, like, this is what I hope to capture too. But anyway, he has a series of books. The author is called Walter Scott, and I just think they're great. I love graphic novels, and this one I think captures just the craziness, the characters, the politics, the infighting, the backstabbing, but the love also. It's a lot of love. I want to make that clear. We talked a lot about the gatekeeping, but ultimately, I was able to find people. We were talking about this, about the importance of finding your people in the art world. And artists were so generous with their time. Gallerists, so many people were so excited to share this passion as well. And there are those people who really want to see more people love it and bring art into their lives. And they're there. I think it's just unfortunate that there has become this culture of sort of gatekeeping even of the viewers. And I don't think art needs a made-up language or velvet ropes to move us or be powerful and magical.
Bianca over here.
Hi, Spencer from the membership. How do you rank Marcel Duchamp? He had a great painting, then he put it all down as retinal, then he had his Dada movement, broke painting, said painting is dead, and meanwhile, while he was playing chess in public, he was working on a piece of art for years that is now hanging in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and if it's beautiful, but you have to go around a corner to see it.
Yeah.
Is he ahead of his time, or is he just proving that he's sort of the someone who is capitalizing on the cynicism, or is he lifting our consciousness up?
Yeah, I think that Duchamp, I assume you're talking about the piece Étant donné, is that the one? Yeah. But no, it's, we'll get back to it. But no, Marcel Duchamp is, I will say I have big love for Marcel Duchamp. I also think that he helped, how would I put this? I think he is partially to blame for a mindset that I think we have perhaps taken too far in the present day. So Duchamp, as you said, was a big advocate for this idea that what mattered with an artwork was the thought more than the thing. That, the importance of the artwork was really about the idea right behind it. And he dismissed a lot of art as being like retinal. The Impressionists, all of it was it was pretty to look at, but it didn't do something for you on a deeper level. And I think that there's something interesting and exciting and important about that, absolutely. I also think that in some ways we've taken the idea of the art being, the idea that the idea is the thing almost too far, to the point that, again, we're emphasizing the context more even than the thing itself. I do think that emphasis on context is in some way this emphasis on the thought trumping the thing taken to its logical extreme. But I do think there's value in that. And interestingly, he argued that there's kind of older art, like some religious art, that was about the idea, that was really about looking at it and having this transformative spiritual experience, which I just think is interesting. I think I was sort of interested to discover that when I was going back through sort of his writings and his work. I also think that Duchamp, his work is oftentimes pretty funny, and it really stands the test of time. One of my favorite pieces was just, I saw it when I was, I think, at Christie's, So he was a pioneer of what's called, the idea of the ready-made, right? Which is basically taking a thing and calling it an artwork, whether it's like a urinal, for example, or in this case of this piece I love, a snow shovel. And he took a snow shovel and he hung it from the ceiling of his studio, and the piece was titled In Advance of the Broken Arm. That's funny. That's great. I love that. Like, I just think that's great. And it's also, I think what he does with some of these works is, again, what artists do, which is to be able to really turn this art mindset, like I said, on the everyday, to be able to pull off that filter of expectation and see the richness and complexity of the world around us. And when I say that art mindset, to me, it's taking an extra beat. It's lingering on why. It's appreciating the sort of miraculous impossibility of the world around us. I find myself sometimes like in the subway, and as opposed to bemoaning like the crumbling infrastructure, I remember like I was on 42nd Street looking at like these cracks and the leaks and the spray painted, to be fixed, construction work, and thinking like, this is beautiful, right? Like this is like an abstract artwork. And I do believe that there is an artist in every single one of us, to the extent that we commit to stop our brains from compressing our experience of the world. I think art is a choice. It's a fight against complacency, and it is a decision to live a life that is more complex, more nuanced, and ultimately so much more beautiful.
Jerry?
Hi, Jerry Eskenazi. My 7-year-old granddaughter saw Starry Night in a book. We took her to MoMA, and she just was transfixed the whole time. Is there something there that tells you, you don't hear about 7-year-old children and art, and she hasn't been told anything, what she's supposed to like, and yet she was fascinated by it.
Yeah. Obviously she's a genius. I think there's just confirming your diagnosis. Yeah. No, I think that, kids, I really, as a guard, like, I really was struck that I think kids are really good at looking at art. And I hesitate to use the word good because, and it applies some of us are bad, but kids are, they don't have the hang-ups, right? I don't think that they're affected, perhaps just, maybe this is just me, but like by the sort of prestige or the elitism or whatever you want to call it. And they're unashamed to have, to dismiss things if they don't like them. And, I remember there was a little boy who was like, hate it, love it, right? And it's like, how many of us would dare like go into a museum and be like, yeah, the curator of the Guggenheim was totally wrong about including this piece, And I think it's fair. I think that's totally fair a reaction to have, to be like, this isn't for me. I do think when it comes to art, and maybe this is just having worked as a guard and spending so much time around the art that, again, it feels like you're friends, I do think there's a value in the thinking of interacting with the work like you're interacting with a human being. Like, the piece that you are good friends with may not be the piece that I'm good friends with, and that's okay. Like with human beings, the more time you spend with it, the better you're going to get to know them. And like with a human being, it's very different to have a Zoom conversation than it is to sit down with someone across from the dinner table, right? It's very different to see a piece on Instagram than it is to be flesh and body across from its flesh and body. When I talk about those decisions an artist makes, it's the scale, right? It is how big it is, how you feel in comparison to it, whether or not you can see the brushstrokes, whether or not they've left, the pencil marks so you can see that. All of that is very deliberate. All of that really happens in person. So yes, your granddaughter is a genius, and I think that, there's something to be said for trusting yourself, and also challenging yourself. I do believe that we can have really incredible soul-shaking experiences when we go to museums, but having seen the way the machine works, I think that the works that end up in these institutions are the product of decisions by individuals who are flawed and biased and working with certain limitations, like any of us. And I think that, there's value to be had in seeing sort of the undiscovered, uncelebrated art. Go to the galleries on the Lower East Side. Go to galleries you've never heard of. Go to galleries in someone's basement. Maybe you will have your face sat on, but that is part of the fun. That is part of the adventure. I think it is important for developing your eye to have those experiences. We talk about sort of eating food that's like close to the source. I think it's important to do the same with culture. Go to things that haven't been through many layers of vetting and gatekeeping, and be surprised, be amazed, kind of see the messiness of what artists today are making and thinking and working on.
I was curious, you spent the book trying to figure out what is art. What about the opposite? Did you come
art,
across...
what is? No.
What isn't art?
What is art? Mm-hmm.
I mean, if sitting on your face is art,
Mm-hmm.
did you go to the other side and say, well, no, this isn't art? And if we say everything that an artist does or an aspiring artist does is, quote, art, then are we watering down the definition, or does it matter? Is there a definition then? There isn't.
Yeah, I mean, look, like when you go into the literature, the experts have largely thrown up their hands on defining art. They're sort of like, when it comes to what art is, in a day when this word gets stretched to include everything from Michelangelo's David to a urinal on a pedestal to someone sitting on a face, they're like, we give up. Like, we just don't know. And I think that there's, I do think that art is more than what fits into museums. It's more than what fits into galleries. There's an interesting ethnographer who uses the definition that art is, again, has been very crucial to our existence and survival as a species, because it binds communities together. And she defines art as essentially the result of making special. So it's these experiences where you, maybe it's repetition, or maybe it's the way you kind of remove something, or maybe it's pattern making. But she would argue that a Super Bowl halftime show is art, that a video game is art. I think that there's probably more kind of types of art. There's probably I do think very strongly that like the experience that we have with art ultimately, how do I put this? It's going to sound circular, but like, I guess I do think that ultimately, rather than trying to come up and draw lines around it, I guess I just come down on the sense that like, what each of us could do more of is develop that visual literacy, is practice that art experience, is practice this idea of letting ourselves be acted on by surprising experiences that other humans have created for us. And so I think that I'm not trying to have a cop-out. I mean, I think the closest that I can come to a definition is, again, this idea of it's kind of a handshake between a creator and the viewer. And it can be very personal. It can be very subjective, ultimately. But, again, I think that rather than sort of belaboring the definition, let's go look at something,
What do you, I think we have to end this, and we're very grateful for you being here.
There's one urgent hand, but go ahead, yes.
I'm sorry.
There's one urgent hand behind you who's waving desperately.
Thank you. My name is Arlene Schulman. I read the book ahead of time, and I did want to announce to you and to everyone in the crowd, I took a photograph of my water glass. So you can get in ahead of time before I'm discovered, and $600 a print. But my question is, in reading the book, could you tell us about, I thought it'd be a fun ending, about the absurdity of communing with a vending machine?
Ah, right, yes. So congratulations on your work. That's awesome. Yes, as part of the research for the book, I went to an commune residency, artist retreat. It was this sort of week-long experience based on the teachings of the Black Mountain School, Black Mountain College. And anyway, we can go into that more afterwards. But one of the exercises that we did with one of the artists there was to all line up together and hug a vending machine and try and harmonize with its hum. This was really weird and uncomfortable, if I'm being honest. I was like, what am I doing here? At some point, we also had to like embody slime. So we like shuffled around pretending to be slime. And I was like, this is embarrassing. I mean, I told my husband about this and he was like, are these kindergarten activities? Like, what are you doing? He was just merciless. But I do think that one of the values, I don't know, that came out of that experience, the artist who led that, she was like, I was like, why are we doing this? And she was like, why does everything have to have a point? You know, why, like, you know, why does it have to have an outcome? And I thought about this, you know, I, during the pandemic was, you know, really realized, I mean, I had started this journey from a point of thinking of art as a luxury, as very optional. And I ended up convinced of its absolute necessity to each of us. And I felt its absence, you know, during the lockdowns on a real physical level. I mean, everyone was like, where can I find toilet paper? And I was like, when are the galleries reopening? And I just craved it so much that I actually started making art with an artist. We would meet for these Zoom drawing sessions and painting sessions. And one of the things that she encouraged me to do was to, you know, think about the things that I was making, not as this end result that I had to hang on the wall, but almost as just a journey in and of itself. And I realized that, like, creating an artwork, I mean, of course, it's different for every artist and where you're doing it, but there was this wonderful sense of exploration on the page. And it was like walking around a city that you have just arrived at and sort of discovering, like, what's around the next turn? What am I going to find? And so, you know, I think that the, harmonizing with the vending machine was surprisingly profound, if I'm being totally honest.
Betsy and Bianca, I'm glad you decided to open this show here before taking it on the road, and we thank you so much for
Thank you.
this afternoon.
Thank you all. Thank you, Bianca. And there are books. You can get one, and Bianca will stay, and she will sign them.